So I love the tips about spaced repetition and webtoons, but I actually think that passive listening is not super efficient. Hey guys, so welcome back to my channel. Today I want to do something a little bit different. I want to review one of IKENNA'S videos, How to Learn Languages Fast. If you don't know who IKENNA is, he's a very popular language learning YouTuber, and the reason why I'm doing this is because different people have different experiences and therefore probably give different advice. I want to put my opinion out there just so that you guys see that there's a diversity of views in terms of what people that learn languages think. Probably I will say some things that will contradict what he says, and the reason for this is not to say I am right, but to rather tell you that there's nothing written in stone and that different things work for different people. So let's start with the video.
In this video, I'm going to be going over how to learn a language as fast as humanly possible. And I'm going to be sharing with you 5 very important tips in order to do so. And stay tuned to the end because the last tip is arguably the most important. Normally, I wouldn't really recommend you to set a goal based off of speed, like, oh, I want to learn this language as quickly as possible. But I think deep down, everyone does. No one wants to take 12 months to get to a place that could take 2 months, right? And for me personally, being the INTJ that I am, I'm obsessed with efficiency. So this video is kind of like a thought experiment. If I were going to learn my languages again, how would I do it?
So the first thing that IKENNA says on his video is that he doesn't recommend people to set up a fluency goal based on speed. The reason why I wholeheartedly agree with that is because number 1, I think that language learning is a life commitment, and number 2, I think that setting a fluency goal based on speed is going to inevitably set you up for failure. When I look back at my personal experiences learning languages, every single time that I started a language, I underestimated the amount of time that it would take me to get to a certain level. So for example, when I was starting French, I thought that by the end of high school I would be fluent. That did not happen. Obviously, in my opinion, speed is not something that you should hyper focus on. You should rather focus on intrinsic motivation, improving on your discipline, being consistent and practicing your language frequently, and making the language learning process as fun as possible so that you really develop this bond and connection to the language and the culture that you're learning.
Tip number 1 is to use a beginner audio program. You guys know me already. You guys know I love language transfer. I love Michelle Thomas and I love Pimsleur. If you are a beginner, or even if you're intermediate, finding audio programs that are structured, that really teach you in a very, very kind of clear and concise way can go a very long way in terms of learning a language quickly because you can do them while you're doing a bunch of other things.
Personally, I've never tried an audio program to start learning a language. The way that I started all of my languages was in either college or in high school. And although I do want to give you a free way of starting a language, personally, I've never had any experiences with trying to learn a language for free, except for Portuguese, but I did have the advantage of being able to understand it because I am a native Spanish speaker. So I don't think that that is, like start watching videos on YouTube in your target language is probably just not the best advice. However, now that I'm graduating, I think that what I would do in order to start learning other languages is hiring a tutor. For me personally, it's just so much easier to start learning the fundamentals with a person in front of me that can explain that to me. For some reason that is very important, but if you do prefer things like an audio program, that seems perfectly fine as an option.
Number 2 is frequency lists. You got to make use out of them. Essentially, if you don't know what frequency lists are, there are lists out there of the most common used words in any given language. And why this is important is because oftentimes you'll find that the 1,000 or let's say the 2,000 most common words in most languages will make up, let's say, 80% or 85% of what you'll hear in actual conversations. That means if you learn a set of like the most common 2,000 words in whatever language that you're learning, essentially you're maximizing the time that you're spending. And if you can stomach it, after a very short time, you're going to be able to actually start getting into content in your target language, whether that's TV shows or books or anything like that. So what I would recommend everyone to do is, if you are going to kind of go with this frequency list approach, you're going to learn the words that are on there, focus mainly on nouns, verbs, and adjectives, and you should try to learn 5 of them a day, 5 words a day. keeps the doctor away. No, 5 words a day is manageable for a lot of people, and if you're able to kind of pull that off, then after a few months, you're going to start having this vocabulary that's going to be building and building. You're going to be able to get into native content.
So I do want to say that frequency lists are a great tip. One thing that I would like to disagree with is that I don't think that 5 days is going to take you from beginner to intermediate, or to being able to understand content in terms of movies and books. When I was learning German, I was learning about 10 to 15 words a day, a little bit less than that, probably like 12 words a day. And it took me 2 years to start understanding videos, to start understanding movies, to start understanding shows. So I think it is a little bit unrealistic to say that 5 words is going to take you from beginner to understanding movies. I know this is probably not something that you want to hear, but if your goal is to go from beginner to understanding movies in a few months, I would say that you would have to bump that up to 65 words a day. And I know that sounds like an awful lot. First of all, I think that you're capable of doing it. You do have to spend a lot of time in it if you want to do that. But at the same time, I feel like just a few months is a very short span of time to say that you want to start learning, you want to start understanding movies and books. So that is just kind of like my tough love advice, and basically what in my experience I've known to be more realistic.
So tip number 3, super important, something that I came up with very recently as well. I started using this website called Webtoon. Basically, it's a website where you can find a bunch of webcomics, and the comics are very, very good. Some of them are Korean, some of them are American, some of them are Japanese, and they're similar to like manga. Webtoons essentially has a version of their site where you can find almost all of their webcomics translated into most popular languages. So if you're learning Spanish, if you're learning Portuguese, if you're learning German, if you go to their website, I'll link it right here, you'll be able to find hundreds of high quality comics that you can read, and through reading, learn your language. So tip number 4 in terms of learning a language quick, guys, passive listening is key. That means in your downtime, I don't care if you're, on the toilet, or you're walking your dog, or you're going to work, or you're actually at work and you're working, but you have a job where you don't have to talk to a lot of people, make sure you're consuming media in the language as much as you can, and you're listening to it as much as you can. This can take the form of podcasts, audiobooks, music, but more or less, when you do find yourself with downtime, when you have to go to the gym, don't put on your typical playlist, put on that playlist in Japanese of Japanese music to pump you up, because if you can make use out of a lot of what would normally be considered downtime, or like time where you're doing other activities, and interject, your target language in there, so you can expose yourself to language as much as possible, then again, maybe if you're listening to an audiobook or you're listening to a podcast, it's not going to be the best way or the most fast way to learn a language in and of itself. However, the fact that you are listening to it off and on while you're doing another task is brilliant, and it's really going to help you learn language fast overall, just because you are interacting with that language even in moments where you normally wouldn't be.
So I love the tips about spaced repetition and webtoons, but I actually think that passive listening is not super efficient. The reason for that is because although I love listening to music in other languages and watching movies in other languages and consuming content in general in other languages, I think that passive listening actually tricks me into thinking that I'm being productive with my practice. I think that it is very tempting to start replacing passive listening for active practice. In my opinion, active practice is something like memorizing vocabulary, exercising your brain in a way that is challenging, or simply speaking the language. Things that really require your undivided attention. With passive listening, I find myself thinking about other things, multitasking, not really being super present or attentive to the language. And I think that at the end of the day, passive listening just makes me think that I am making good use of my time, but in reality, I am not really learning that much. And obviously, if passive listening does help you and has helped you, by all means do it. I am just saying that for me, it feels more of like a mind trick that precludes me from actually doing the practice that I think that the most for me, which is active practice.
So the last and final tip number 5, is reading novels, reading books, and also rewatching shows.
So IKENNA'S final tip is just watching movies and shows, which is something that you guys know I do all the time, so of course I agree with that. Overall, I think that his video was very informative. I learned some things for myself, and if you guys have any feedback either for me or for the things that IKENNA said, please leave them in the comments down below. I also want to give a big thanks to Skillshare, which has sponsored this video. Skillshare is an online learning community that offers thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people on topics including productivity, language learning, time management, personal development, and more. As a life learner myself, I am always trying to hone my productivity skills. So I recently started a course by YouTuber and podcaster Thomas Frank called How to Build Habits That Last. One of the main takeaways I had from this course was to limit my goal list. I am definitely the kind of person that wants to pursue 10 goals at a time, but as Thomas Frank said in his class, it takes time and deep concentration to make genuine progress in the things I want to pursue. So having a myriad goals does have the negative impact of affecting the depth at which I can pursue something. So head on to Skillshare to get access to thousands of inspiring classes with hands-on projects and feedback from a community of millions. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership so you can explore your creativity.